Welcome. Yeah, y'all can do it. Yeah, come on, a little bit better than that. Biomedical Engineering. Who knew? Who knew there was such a demand for these tickets? I told one gentleman just came up to me and he said, man, I had a couple of friends that kind of snoozed on them and waited, and they're out of luck. I saw a few people selling them out in the parking lot. Some autograph sessions behind you. Are you guys going to stay around for autographs? Okay. All right. Well, that's awesome. Well, welcome. How many first-timers? First-timers. Okay. A good amount. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. You're speaking. This is the first time and you're speaking. Sir, why did you come tonight?
To speak, ma'am.
I love it. All right. Keep them up. Keep them up. Why did you come?
To learn a lot about biomedical engineering.
You're in the right spot. You're in the right spot. Who else? Who else? Yes, sir.
My wife is speaking.
I almost said which one, and I remember that there's only one out of the four. Good support. Hey, great support system. You're like a jockstrap. Love it. All right. We got one more. How about a lady? Yes, ma'am. How about you? Pass it down. Why are you here?
Because I'm an undergrad and I need a job.
Anybody hiring? What's your major? Again, right spot. Love it. Love it. Well, if I did just kind of put you on the spot, see me afterwards. We've got a handful of T-shirts. I'd love to give you one. Yeah, you can get a T-shirt too. Yeah. Again, thank you all for coming. So we do have a decent amount of new people. Love that. We've been doing this for 4 years now. A little over 4 years. I've done every single one. Either that means I have no outside life or I love doing it. Both, actually. I've done it sick as a dog. I've planned my wedding around it and honeymoon. When I proposed to my then girlfriend, now wife, I said, sweetheart, we can get married anytime and go anywhere you want to. We just can't go on the third Thursday of the month, and graciously she agreed. That is why I'm wearing this shirt, little Hawaiian shirt. We've been married for 1 year. Made it. We got married last July, so still love her. She still loves me. We live stream this. I hope she's not watching. Welcome. Let's just go through a few little housekeeping rules. First off, my name's Will. I've got a marketing company called Fanbase. So I'm not affiliated with RTP, so if I do say anything that offends you, I'm sorry, but don't email RTP about it. You can just email me right there, tell me. I've only done this one time. I've only offended somebody one time out of 4 years, so pretty good track record. You are sitting in the Frontier, which normally is full of tables, chairs, people working all day. So this is a free, on the first floor, free co-working spot. So if you've never checked this out during the day, I'd invite you to come check it out. There's lots of other events that go on, food truck rodeo, run club, happy hours, a lot of fitness stuff, a lot of discovery type of things like 180, workshops. Check out the website. Make sure you get plugged in. And presenters tonight, they get 5 minutes. They've already kind of been briefed on this. They're going to get 5 minutes. I am the triangle girl, so... yeah, don't Google that. Not good. I will make a ding. That's the best I can do at 5 minutes. They know that that is not the, oh crap, got to get off the stage right then and there. They can continue on for a little bit longer. Since we only have 4 tonight, we generally roll with 5 or 6. We're going to do Q&A, and we're going to allow for 3 questions this evening. So be thinking of a question that you would like to ask. I will run around and grab those questions from you, and then the presenters will answer them. Let's be social, but we can do it online, of course. Use the hashtag RTP180. After I introduce and I'm listening, I'm over there tweeting back and forth with people. A lot of people like to give me a hard time. That's fun too. But just be social, and to kind of be careful that this room is pretty hot. When I say that, there's no carpet on the floor. There's no ceiling, really. So if you are talking to your neighbor, especially like over in the corner or back to the left, in the back, everyone can hear you. So please just be very cautious of that. Of course, like I said, be social, but just tweet back and forth to each other if you want to talk to somebody. That's the better way to do it anyway. And of course, throw away your trash, please. As a giant thank you to RTP for opening up the space, letting us come in and do this. Just leave it like you found it, please. That'd be awesome. They will appreciate it. I will appreciate it. And of course, kind of already covered that. Everyone can hear you. Let's get started. Yes. What? Let's see the you're seeing the triangle, girl. If that's what he said, I don't know. Oh, no. Okay, Andy Taylor graduated with a BS in Biomedical Engineering in 2015 from the UNC-NC State Department of Biomedical Engineering, focusing in regenerative medicine and global health. After graduating, Andy co-founded the Medical Innovators Collaborative, or MEDIC, and he is currently the acting president of the organization. You know what? Let's have some fun. Why don't we do the... Come on, let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Andy Taylor.
Thank you.
It kind of worked.
It's good enough. All right, thank you. So, like you said, I'm here to talk about the Medical Innovators Collaborative, or MEDIC. But first, I want to talk a little bit about myself. So, this was me 1 year ago before I started the company. I was an aspiring sailor at the time, as you can tell by the uniform. But in all seriousness, when I was born, I had a condition called neonatal jaundice. And what this means is that my liver was not fully developed, and as a result, I couldn't process a chemical in my body called bilirubin. Now, if this had gotten severe enough and built up, it could have led to neurological damage or even death, which would have been tragic because we would have had to cut 5 minutes off the event today. But it's not a very uncommon disorder. About 2/3 of the infants across the globe develop this disorder, and 1/10 of which are severe enough to lead to disability or death. There are over 100,000 deaths across the globe every year, and over 6 million infants go without treatment, which is really a shame because the treatment is very simple. All you have to do is shine a blue light on the baby's skin, and this causes the bilirubin to spin a certain way so that the baby can excrete it. However, the units that provide this therapy cost between $4,000 and $6,000 a piece, and they have replaceable light bulbs that cost about $60 a piece, and it requires a constant source of electricity. So I was lucky enough to work with a team of engineering students my senior year at NC State, and we were dedicated to developing new ways to provide therapies in low-income countries. And when we learned about phototherapy, we started to ask ourselves, how is this given in low-income countries? And it turns out, in a lot of cases, it just isn't because it isn't feasible. So over the course of my senior year, we developed what we called the BiliSol, which it's a really simple device. The light from the sun has that blue wavelength that can provide phototherapy in its spectrum. And so all this filter does is it blocks UV radiation away, and it lets the blue light through to provide the therapy without any need for electricity, and it costs about $100 a build. And when we figured out this device works, we were ecstatic. I mean, we were going to change the world. We were going to save babies' lives. We were going to be best friends with Bill and Melinda Gates. But life happened. And all of us graduated, we went and got jobs, and the BiliSol ended up sitting on a shelf, which didn't sit very well with me. But it's not an uncommon problem in North Carolina. So there's a recent report from the North Carolina Board of Science, Technology, and Innovation that looked at all the different states in the country and ranked them off of certain economic criteria. And what that report found is that North Carolina actually ranks 5th when it comes to federal research funding brought in, which is amazing. However, when it comes to venture capital dispersed in the state, we rank 23rd. And in general, when it comes to commercialization activities, we're below average. So what are some of the gaps in the innovation ecosystem here? And I'm going to focus specifically on medical devices because that's where MEDIC works right now. The first group that we work with is with healthcare practitioners who are on the front lines of healthcare, identifying all kinds of unmet medical needs, and oftentimes coming up with ideas for ways to solve those problems. But at the end of the day, they don't have the time, know-how, or resources to turn those ideas into tangible products. And at the same time, our universities are pumping out tons of student talent that are clamoring for internships, especially in the life science space. And there simply aren't enough internships in the area to keep up with the demand. And as a result, a lot of these students have to leave the state to find valuable training opportunities. And in general, there aren't many resources available to help people with very early stage concepts develop them to the point where they can find a company around them. So MEDIC is positioning itself right in the center of this community to help connect the dots between all the great resources that already exist and help fill some of these gaps. And the main way that we do this is by working with clinical innovators from our hospitals who have these great ideas. We pair them with the students from local universities who we train and manage in the product development process to help push these ideas further along. So we've worked with a lot of different groups along the way, all the universities in the area, as well as the Research Triangle Foundation. They were instrumental into getting us started. And we also have a very long list of executive partners. We're not just a bunch of engineering students working on projects trying to make something happen. We have local experts in things like FDA regulations, business, IP strategy, all helping guide these projects along to make sure that they have what they need to succeed. And so this is what a year of Medic is going to look like once we're running at full scale, which we plan to be doing January of 2018. Every year, we're going to be bringing in 15 technologies from the area, and we're going to put about 75 students from the local universities to work on them, with the goal of every year pumping out 5 new medical device companies in RTP. Each of those companies will have a built and validated prototype, as well as intellectual property protection and strategies for the common pitfalls in medical device development, such as reimbursement and FDA regulations. And we're also going to be looking to secure spin-out funding for each of these companies. And the story I told you earlier has a happy ending. Thanks to Medic, we were able to bring in the Billy Soul as one of our projects. And actually, this past January, we were able to take 2 prototypes to some hospitals in Guatemala where they're doing some preliminary testing so we can get some early feedback. So if you or anyone you know is interested in helping out with the medical device community and becoming a part of this organization or community, feel free to reach out to us. We have our website at medic-nc.org. That's it.
Beautiful. Nicely done. Didn't even have to ding you.
There you go.
I love it. All right, 3 questions.
You can ding if you want.
Ding! There she is. 3 questions. What about the young lady that's looking for a job? Sounds like a great organization to get involved in.
No pressure.
Meet some people. 3 questions. One question? Yes, sir.
Do you guys do work in the animal field?
We have not to date, but we are very interested in working in veterinary health. There are a lot of analogs between biomedical engineering and veterinary health. It's something that we're definitely looking at getting into in the future.
Anybody else? Yeah. Okay, now some brave souls. All right.
What's been the most exciting project or company you've seen develop?
I mean, I'm biased, so I would say the one that I developed. But no, we've worked on some pretty interesting things. One project that I like to showcase, it was more patient specific because early on that's kind of the projects that we were able to find, but we're working with a girl who has a condition called arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, which is a mouthful. It's AMC for short, and it's a joint contracture disease. This girl is 2 years old and she already can't bend the majority of her joints because of a buildup of connective tissue. And so she can't do things a 2-year-old should be able to do, like play. So we're working with a team of engineers to develop a tension-based system that will help her muscles get past that connective tissue that's built up and help her play around, and we have the ultimate goal of helping her be able to feed herself because currently she's on a feeding tube.
I see. Yeah, all right.
How do you decide where to target those innovations? Like just sort of that project that you are having people work on, what made you decide to go with that? Where are the engineers coming up with the ideas? Are you driving that? What's your process?
Yeah. We try to field all of our ideas from local academic or healthcare institutions. So what we're going to be doing is bringing in as many ideas as possible and then sitting down with our board and our executive partners and figuring out which 15 have the most promise. And then over the course of that year, based on certain criteria, if we figure out that there's no way it'll get through the FDA, things like that, we'll kind of knock the projects out as we go through the process. All right.
Thank you, sir. Nice job. I feel like tonight we could play a little game. You were, I think it was 439. So we'll play a game. Who can get the closest to 5 without going over? 439. She said, I'm going to go 15 minutes. No, she's not. All right. So generally, I do tell a few jokes, if it's okay. If you don't mind if I tell one, it has nothing to do with tonight's topic, but I think it's kind of fun. What is the best game to play while using the restroom? Call of Duty. Some of you are probably, I don't know that game. It's like a online game. All right. Hey, you know what? It's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. Are you ready? You got to follow that. Are you sure? Your husband's here and everything, and you got to follow that. I apologize. All right, Dr. Ashley Brown is an assistant professor in the Joint Department of Biomedical Engineering at North Carolina State University and UNC Chapel Hill. How many Wolfpack? What about that powder blue school? Wow, quite. Somebody just say purple? Oh, no? Okay. Darn it. Dr. Brown directs the Advanced Wound Healing Lab, which focuses on the development of biomedical materials to promote tissue repair. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome with a big, giant round of applause, Dr. Ashley Brown. Have fun.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction and those amazing words. So let's see. So today I'm going to be describing mimicking nature in order to promote healing. So I'm going to start out first by describing the concept of biomimicry, which is an approach to innovation that seeks sustainable solutions to human challenges by emulating nature's time-tested patterns and strategies. So a couple of examples first. One that I'm sure everyone in this room is very familiar with is the idea of using birds to inspire airplane design. Another example is mimicking the structure of gecko feet to actually create structures that result in super strong adhesives. So my lab also uses biomimicry, and specifically we focus on mimicking natural blood cell properties, specifically platelets, in order to create materials that help stop bleeding and improve healing outcomes. So just a little bit of background, wound healing, I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. It's a very essential process, but if it goes awry, this can contribute to a number of pathologies. Most importantly, blood loss, as well as, or uncontrolled bleeding, as well as chronic wounds. So importantly, blood loss due to trauma is a leading cause of death in this country, specifically for the ages between 5 and 44. Even in patients that can stop bleeding, numerous problems can occur in the healing process after bleeding stops, and this can lead to what are known as chronic non-healing wounds. Chronic wounds are also a major problem in our country, and they affect over 6.5 million people in the US alone. They also cause huge healthcare costs. So you can see these stats here, $25 billion per year in healthcare costs due to non-healing wounds. And of course, conditions like aging, obesity, and diabetes increase patient risk for developing these kinds of wounds. And of course, these conditions are on the rise in our country, so we only expect in coming years for problems with chronic wounds to increase. So my lab focuses, again, on mimicking nature in order to create new types of materials to treat bleeding as well as treat chronic wounds. And I mentioned this already, but the primary inspiration that we use are platelets. So platelets are natural blood cells that are found within your body. Typically, they just circulate in your body in this nice, small, round state in an inactive form. As soon as a wound happens, what's known as the coagulation cascade is initiated, and the platelets become active. When that happens, they bind to the wound site, and they promote clotting. You can see here, this is an actual image. It's false-colored, but this is a scanning electron microscopy image of platelets, shown here in purple, and they're interacting within a clot network, and here they're binding to fibrin, which is the main protein found in blood clots. And you may also recognize these are red blood cells that are interspersed. So after bleeding stops, another really important function of platelets is they start to really actively contract, and they'll pull on that fibrin network through a process that's called clot retraction. Retraction is really important for healing, so remember that. This is a really complicated slide, and I'm not going to go into detail with this slide today, but what this slide highlights is the numerous additional functions of platelets in the healing process. What I do want to focus on is here, when injury happens and the coagulation cascade is stimulated and platelets become active, they undergo a very significant shape change, which is important for and actually critical for that clot retraction event. So my group aims to not only make particles that induce clotting, but also particles that are able to mimic this ability of platelets to pull on a clot and induce retraction. So the way that we do that is we make very small hydrogel microparticles, and then we combine them with elements that allow them to bind to wound sites. So some really cool data that I'm not going to go into detail with, but when we take these particles, we can see that they promote clotting in vitro. This is here we're testing them in a microfluidics device that's essentially an artificial blood vessel. We also see that they stop bleeding in a rat trauma model. And interestingly, these particles promote clotting not only in healthy rats, but as well as rats that have received a low dose of aspirin, which contributes to bleeding problems in a large number of patients in this country. But what's really interesting is the particles that we use are really soft and they're highly deformable, which allows them to actually mimic and display the morphology of activated platelets. So here you can actually see these are our artificial particles, and this is compared to an actual activated platelet, so you can notice the similarities there. Ding! Okay, 30 seconds. But what's really interesting is these particles, because they mimic platelet morphology, they induce this retraction and promote healing. So we have seen that our particles increase stability of clots. They also promote cell migration, and they increase wound healing in a mouse model of wounds. And so this is an active area of research for my group. We're currently making other types of materials that mimic additional platelet functions and healing, and we're applying them to a number of different applications. And just really quickly want to acknowledge my group, especially Dr. Aaron Sproul and graduate student Seema Nandi, who did a lot of the work that I showed very quickly today. Of course, funding sources, and you guys for your attention. Thanks. I'll take questions.
All right. Oh, okay. Don't even have to. One.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks.
The experiments you were doing, was that topical application or systemic? And if it was systemic, would you consider combining it with the NSAIDs that cause their own duodenal bleeding issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've tried both. So for the bleeding studies, that we're using the particles as in an injectable manner. For the wound healing applications that we've done so far, that's been a topical application. We certainly could combine them with NSAIDs. The great thing about this platform is it allows us to add a number of additional functionalities, and that's certainly one that we could consider.
For the record, you stole my question, by the way. Just so we're clear.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. No, you really stole the guy behind you's question. All right, let's keep on going.
How do you induce the shape change of those microparticles, or is it just time-based?
Great question. So the particles themselves, we make them through a reaction that ends up making the particles extremely loosely cross-linked. So it's basically a small hydrogel network that's very loosely cross-linked, and so it allows the particle just by itself to take on multiple shapes. When we combine that with elements that allow it to bind to the fibrin clot, that actually increases the spreading and shape change as well. Yeah.
So my question is, what do you view as the greatest barrier to introducing a pharmaceutical grade platelet biomimetic?
Pharmaceutical grade, that's a really great question. I would say the protein aspect. So we take our particles and we couple them to either a peptide or an antibody, some sort of bioactive motif, and that's going to be the largest hurdle for us, I think. Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Nice job. 601, not bad, respectable. Certainly respectable. I got a t-shirt right back here for you. All right. Another joke, or let's keep rolling? One person said joke. We'll keep rolling. All right. We'll save the joke. Dr. Matthew, the light's a little bright. There you are. You ready? I got this. I'm going to nail it. Dr. Matthew Fisher is an assistant professor in the Joint Department of Biomedical Engineering at NC State and UNC Chapel Hill. His lab studies biomechanics and tissue engineering of the musculoskeletal system. I was a little worried about that big word. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Matthew Fisher.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, and thanks to RTP 180 for having me. Today I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what we are interested in musculoskeletal tissues, and more importantly, I'm going to try to link all the words in my title together in 5 minutes or less. So, the major clinical influence that we focus on is injuries due to sports, right? So, how many people play sports? How many people have kids that play sports? So, that's a huge problem. So, youth sports are increasingly popular, which is good. On the bad side, that means that injuries are all that more common. So, just as an example, the highest rates of anterior cruciate ligament injuries in the knee are in teenagers, specifically females. So, as an engineer, we try to think, well, how do we prevent injuries? How do we treat injuries better? And how do we stop long-term complications? And as an engineer and a scientist, this leads us to other questions, more basic science, the things that we still don't know, like how do musculoskeletal tissues grow and mature? Okay? If we're going to treat youth injuries, we need to know how these things happen. And this is something I think about all the time because I have 2 young kids at home and I teach undergraduates, so I see the spectrum of growth almost every single day. Whether or not I see the spectrum of maturity is a little bit debatable. But nevertheless, so what we do is we look at this from a number of different facets. So we look at tissue anatomy and joint function. How do these things grow and how do they work? We also look at intrinsic changes, which I won't talk about today. A lot of what I focus on in our lab is the knee joint, which has 2 bones, muscles that control its movement, as well as soft tissues which guide its movement. And I'm going to focus a lot on the soft tissues today. So first, in terms of tissue anatomy, so these are MRI images of the knee joint. We use a pig model, so you can see from birth all the way up to early adulthood. So just take a moment and see how drastic those changes are on MR as we go from birth to early adulthood. A lot of that bright white stuff is cartilage, some of which turns into bone. If you look very closely, you can see growth plates, which slowly close over time. So there's a huge anatomical change in our joints that occurs over time. And so how you treat an injury early in youth should be very different than what you do in adulthood. We can then take those MR images and reconstruct them into 3D images, which allow us to more quantitatively assess how these things grow over time. So here's just an animation showing that, and we can take that, pull that data out and look at how these tissues change in shape over time to try to get a better understanding of how they grow. Moving on to joint function, we actually use something from the automotive industry, and these are robotics. So here you can see a robot actually moving a car around. And what we like about this is that these types of machines are really stiff and they're really strong, but they also have huge ranges of motion. So how do we use that in the lab? Well, we take those same robots and we put individual knee joints on there, and you can see in the bottom figure there, if you look very closely, and you'll see it move in a second, it's flexing and extending a knee joint. Okay? So we can take these robotic systems and simulate human and animal motions in the lab to understand better how do joints move, how do individual tissues within these joints work, and how can we make things better, okay, specifically after injury. So just as an example, I mentioned that ACL in the knee joint. It's actually a really complex tissue. It's got multiple structures even within it. So what we can do is test how that works throughout different age groups, and what we find is that how it works actually changes pretty significantly with age. Some bundles do more early, some bundles do more late. So just in the last couple minutes or so, I just want to talk about how can we make better functional replacements. And for this, we turn to this idea of tissue engineering. which is trying to, in the lab, make tissues that our bodies make naturally. And so that involves cells, of course. It involves other kinds of biochemical factors. And it also involves scaffolds, so the things that our cells live in. The problem with musculoskeletal tissues is that they're really complex on multiple scales. So this is an example of our meniscus, but you can see on the macro scale, it's got really complex shape. And then if we look really closely under the microscope, it's actually got a really highly organized collagenous architecture, which is really important for its function. So one approach that we're doing is creating new 3D biofabrication platforms that will allow us to capture this multi-scale shape all in one scaffold. So you can see here's a 3D printer making fibers that are small, near the order of the native extracellular matrix that we're interested in replicating. So just in summary, musculoskeletal tissues undergo complex changes during growth, and imaging and robotics can help us to understand how these changes occur. And fiber-based tissue engineering can allow us to engineer better replacements. So I just want to acknowledge the folks in my lab, particularly Stephanie Cohn and Paul Warren, whose work I showed today, our collaborators and funding sources, and I'm happy to take any questions while the robot pours me a beer.
Nice work. All right, questions? Don't be shy. Oh, are you stretching or you have a question? Both? Okay. There you go.
So you
It's
spoke
very
a lot.
unorthodox here. Watch. Yeah.
It looks a little bit.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, yeah. So my question is, you talked a lot about how the knee develops from childhood through early adulthood or adulthood. Does it develop much more through adulthood and into, through adulthood, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I mean, so our bodies never stop changing, right? The processes by which they change, however, do differ, right? So when we're talking about going from a baby to a teenager, the processes are different. Make sure you get all of it. Yeah. The processes are very different, right? So we're growing, we're expanding, right? And we're maturing too. So kids are much more flexible than we are as adults, right? Now, the process, once we go from early adult to late adult, that's aging, right? And so that's sort of more a different type of process, but one that I don't study, but one that our next speaker does. Yeah.
Did you just toss that over?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, perfect. We got one back here. Anybody else? Anybody else? Just okay, gotcha.
Can you mention some of the fibers that show promise and what are the structures?
So into the fibers in terms of what they're made of? Sorry?
The replacement?
Yeah. Oh, so what is, so replacement scaffolds that show particular promise. One of them is for the knee meniscus. This is a tissue that sort of cushions the bones and the cartilage in between your femur and tibia. When you tear your meniscus, it doesn't grow back. And replacements are not so great. Currently, a lot of what clinicians do will actually remove the tissue, which leads to early arthritis. And so one thing that we can do in the lab for the meniscus in particular is recreate that complex shape that is difficult to do otherwise. And so there are a lot of meniscus substitute products that are making their way to market currently. So that's just one example.
Go for it.
So are you also looking at the applications of recreating the ACL structure also? And have there been any animal studies tested based on its, I don't know if you've gotten that far yet, on its, I guess, how good it works compared to an auto or allograft in replacements?
Right. That's a great question. So, normally when you tear your ACL, it doesn't grow back, for those of you who don't know, and so you often have to have it replaced entirely. So a lot of times what clinicians will do, they'll take a tissue from your own body or a cadaveric piece of tissue to replace your ACL. And those actually, in adults, they actually work quite well. There's some problems, some problems with re-tear rates and those types of things, but they work quite well. What's interesting is that if you're a teenager and you tear your ACL, your risk or probability of re-tearing that ACL or having a secondary ACL injury is on the order of 25 to 30%. So whatever is being done currently in terms of autografts, allografts, is not really doing the job, or we need to make it better so that they don't re-tear. One of the ways that we can do this is through substitutes that can potentially grow better with the patient as opposed to just sort of sitting there while the patient grows. So it's a really big opportunity that I think is a little bit further down the road, but it's a really big opportunity for this idea of tissue engineering. Anything that can grow with the patient is going to be better than something that you just implant and leave it to its own devices.
Thanks, sir. Good job. I really thought you were at like 457, and then you said, to recap, and then you ended up at 518. Not too bad. Wait, worth it? Absolutely worth it. Absolutely worth it. Okay, I do believe we have time for one last joke. If you've heard this one before, because again, 4 years of doing this, there's bound to be a repeat or two. Let some of the newer folks kind of take it and see if they can't get it. But what does a nosy pepper do? No clue, do you? No. Gets jalapeno business. Yes, the slow clap. I love it. Or just a single clap. That's fine. Either one. We can keep going. Can we forfeit the Dr. Jason? Are you sure? We can just do jokes. No. No. Because he kind of did a little softball over to you, so I think you got to catch this one and run with it. Don't do it. I wouldn't do it. Don't do it. All right, Dr. Jason Franz is an assistant professor in the UNC NCSU. I'm seeing a trend here. Joint Department of Biomedical Engineering. He directs the Applied Biomechanics Laboratory and studies the biomechanics and neural control of human movement with a special emphasis on aging and disease-related mobility impairments. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jason Franz. Get you the clicker. There you go. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna have a hard time seeing the hands, but how many of you have an older relative that's lost their independence in the community or fallen? All right, it's not surprising, right? So I do direct the Applied Biomechanics Laboratory. We're housed at UNC. Our department is very well represented, as it should be, in the area. So my lab studies both the musculoskeletal and sensory motor adaptations that underlie the loss of independent walking ability, primarily due to aging, but also more recently due to orthopedic injury, acute neurological injury like stroke, or neurodegenerative disease. The idea here is that by better understanding the mechanisms governing these changes, we can develop new and more effective clinical countermeasures to both preserve and restore independent mobility and mitigate that exceptionally high risk of falls. And this is a critical need for innovation here because unfortunately most of the statistics that you see across the bottom here, and many of you are familiar with these, despite our best efforts, those statistics haven't changed in the last 20 years. In fact, as just one example, more recent evidence suggests that the rate of injurious falls, these are falls in people over the age of 65 that land them in the emergency department, that rate is accelerating and actually outpacing the growth in the older adult population. So I'm going to take my time today to talk about two major lines of our research that are seeking to address these two translational efforts. First, preserving and restoring walking ability, and second, understanding and mitigating falls risk. So the first of these is that it turns out that the calf muscles and the large Achilles tendon that they attach to, these are critical functional components of the human musculoskeletal system, powering activities like walking and running. These structures are also disproportionately afflicted by aging and gait pathology. And so my lab has developed and uses novel imaging approaches, ultrasound imaging approaches, that allow us to link microstructural changes at the level of the tendon to contractile dynamics at the level of the muscle, to individual joint and individual limb changes as they occur in aging, trying to identify the source of impairments. And what's really novel about this is that we can take our ultrasound imaging tools and apply them to the functional activities that people have the most problems with in their daily lives. For example, here, during walking. We're using these data to inform things like biofeedback technologies, to encourage people to walk better, or to, more recently, to tailor the prescription of wearable robotic devices for rehabilitation. All right, so the next major line of research in my lab is actually built on the sensory motor framework that you see here. So most of you walked into this room, and the way you were able to do that without falling over is by relying on sensors that are under your feet: peripheral sensation, joint position sense, proprioception. But unfortunately, those are the sensors that go bad first in aging and neurodegenerative diseases like multiple sclerosis. And your brain is like, I need something, give me anything to work with. And it turns out that with aging and neurodegenerative disease, there's an increased dependence on vision as a reference for balance control. So we're going to leverage that normal physiological process for its diagnostic and rehabilitative potential. So here we've developed a custom virtual reality environment in my lab that allows us to perturb or augment optical flow to tell your brain that you're falling over. And then we measure things about your dynamic response, either at the individual muscle level using EMG, or even at the electrocortical level using EEG. From the diagnostics perspective, we think that we can elicit preclinical balance deficits that are not otherwise apparent using conventional balance and mobility and testing. On the rehabilitative side, we think that this gives an opportunity to practice dynamic balance corrections from one step to the next, that we can prime the motor control system to respond better to something unexpected out in your community. And let's see how close I am to 5 minutes. These are our wonderful collaborators, wonderful postdocs and students, as well as our funding sources for the projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Call it a winner if you want to. 422. Okay. Love it. Did I see a hand? Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
So other than vision, are you also researching other ideas in terms of how to correct their walking or providing other kind of input to the person so that they don't fall?
Yeah, so on our falls research, we're really focusing on vision because it is what's most prioritized if you happen to be older or if you happen to have a diagnosis with a neurodegenerative disease. And so we think that that's the prime opportunity, especially because most of the conventional balance testing that you go to the doctor and they do some conventional testing, and the doctor comes back and they say, look, I think you should probably consider some balance training. I think you're at risk of falls. And you're like, well, yeah, I fell twice last month. I already know this. So conventional testing is really good at telling you you're at risk of falls once you've fallen. And what we've shown in some of our data over the last 3 or 4 years is that we can actually show balance deficits before you can otherwise see them with conventional testing.
Is he done? I'm looking, okay.
I don't know where you are, it's so bright.
Yeah, it was really awkward. I'm like kneeling in the middle between two people. I'm so sorry. I bumped into you like 5 times, so here you go.
I guess my question is, with the information that you gain from looking at gait analysis and the ultrasound, what are the future applications you can use with that information?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So there's one major line of research in my lab that's funded by NIH for the next 4 years, and that is that the Achilles tendon is not one tendon, but it's actually 3 subtendons that merge and twist down to the calcaneus, your heel bone. And with aging, there's adhesions that develop between these subtendons. Those adhesions unfavorably couple your 3 calf muscles and compromise their performance. And so we're trying to understand how that cascade of events actually plays out and what we can do about it. For example, there are injectables, people that have just discovered this in the last 2 years or so. It's essentially oil or grease for your tendon. It's called lubricin. So the idea of being able to see if an injectable like that could restore independent actuation at the level of the calf muscles. Another application is that your tendon becomes more compliant as you get older. So the idea of placing wearable robotics on the outside of your limb to augment the structural stiffness of the calf muscles and restore that performance.
Do you have any information on how that aging curve that you're talking about, how is that impacted by the use? So if you're actually using the muscles, how much is the curve slowed down or altered by the use of that?
So absolutely, disuse accelerates some of the things like sarcopenia. This is the loss of skeletal muscle mass. But most of the research that we've done over the last 15 years have been in very active individuals. So it turns out that exercise alone doesn't sort of prevent some of the key biomechanical elements that we see emerge in older adults. So we need to look for other opportunities. Super. This is my favorite part anyway. I have extra time.
Thanks for a great talk. So in addition to some of the external ultrasound and other monitoring that you're doing, are you partnering with anyone to do biomonitoring of biosamples to look at genomic or proteomic profiles that might give you some insight into biomarkers that could be potential treatment options from a molecular perspective?
No. But if you'd like to talk after, I mean, certainly there's a lot of aging research that is at that level, and ultimately it all builds up, right? It all builds up and leads to limited function in older adults. So I think there's opportunities to go across multiple scales, certainly.
Thank you, sir. Great job. A wonderful job to all of our speakers. How about one last final round of applause? Certainly one of the rare times that majorities stay within that 5-minute realm. We've had like an 18-minute person before. That's no fun. It is, but all right. So last couple little things before I let you go, if you don't mind. Next month, the 17th, correct? Yes, right behind me. No, yes, it is. Hacking. So think anything hacking, security reasons, growth hacking for maybe like a digital marketing person. So kind of a loose term there on hacking, but should be fun. We'd love to see you back. Again, we do this every third Thursday of the month. So just go ahead and put it in your calendar as that recurring thing and show up every single month, because we do have a good time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed yourselves this evening. Come for a topic that you may not know a ton about. It's always interesting. I mean, 4 years of every single topic that you can imagine, between food and social media and tonight and engineering, I mean, all sorts of things. It's a pretty cool time, and to see and learn new things. Okay, that's enough of me. It's free t-shirt time. Oh, I did learn one other thing. Y'all don't like Twitter, do you? I look around and y'all are not tweeting, you're taking notes. That is a smart crowd. Normally people are like tweeting back and forth at me and I'm like, hello, no one's here, but you're all taking notes. I saw so many notebooks open. Okay, the 3 or so people that I kind of picked on